Let's talk about many people's favorite part of beekeeping, honey. We'll learn about how honey is made, tips for improving your honey production, and how to harvest and extract honey. In the first step of making honey, the bees forage for nectar from flowers. They'll travel in a good 2-mile radius searching for flowers. That's about 9,000 acres. They'll store it in their honey stomach, which is the part in their body right before their actual stomach. As a side note, bees do consume some nectar and honey as they go along, and when they do, the bee's digestive system has a pollen filter. The pollen grains are packed tightly together by the proventriculus and are passed as a bolus down through the ventriculus and ultimately can become bee poop. Then the bees will pass it along to one another, further continuing the dehydration process. This process also works to spread pheromones throughout the hive as the bees feed each other. Each bee that touches the liquid will get the nectar closer to becoming honey. Since nectar is about 80% water, the bees will continue to dehydrate it. Once it's stored in the cells, they'll push air through the hive by flapping their wings furiously and pointing their body towards the hive entrance. We call this fanning. They'll leave the cell open until they've dehydrated the honey to an acceptable level, usually about 17 or 18% moisture, and then they'll eventually cap it with wax for storage. The bees will cap the honey with wax capping for longer-term storage, and then, when it's time to eat it, they'll simply chew through the capping to get to it. Honey is complex. It has fructose, glucose, and sucrose, about 17-18% water, as well as minerals, vitamins, and enzymes. The complexity of honey is hard to see in just the composition. Honey has antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial properties that make it a common household remedy. Honey has been used to treat wounds, improve gut health, and the consumption of hive products has actually been shown to extend telomere length, leading to potentially longer life or slower aging. Now we're going to talk about some bullet points for maximizing honey production. As per usual, keeping strong colonies will benefit your honey production. You want a strong population before the bloom so that the workforce is maximized. Keeping young, well-mated queens will decrease the swarming tendency as well when ramping up larger colonies. While this is tough for the first year, using drawn comb can be a great strategy in maximizing honey production. This allows the bees to immediately store nectar as it comes in and also decreases the need for consumption to create excessive or extra wax. To maximize honey production, you'll want to keep an eye out for honey-producing plants in your area and begin to watch for the buds prior to the bloom. You'll need to be quick to add space early in the bloom as the nectar will come pouring in very quickly. Then, towards the end of the flow, you can slow down your supering to avoid adding too much space. There's a little experimentation as to the number of hives in an area that can support producing maximum amounts of honey. For example, if an area is packed filled with bee colonies, you will see a reduction on the average of pounds, obviously, that each colony can produce. Keep this in mind in relation to the size of the bloom and floral sources around you, and try to manage your apiary size accordingly, especially if your goal is to maximize honey production. Processing honey can be done a few different ways, so let's talk about those methods. After the honey flow, you'll be able to remove the honey from the hive. You can do this by removing an entire box of honey, or you can remove them frame by frame. This choice may be due to physical limitations of lifting extremely heavy or full boxes, or just personal choice. To remove the bees from a honey frame, you can use a bee brush, and this is a relatively low-tech and simple way to remove bees without expensive or special tools. You'll want to use smoke somewhat sparingly on the frames themselves to avoid ash flavors in the honey when you go to extract it. This is why beekeepers often use fume boards, where a bee repellent like Bee Quick can be added to the felt lid to drive the bees out of the top of the box. Bee escapes are also designed to remove bees from the honey super. When using these, you would need about 24 or 48 hours, so it's just a slower process and does require a specially designed bee escape board. Handheld blowers can also be used to remove bees from the frames, and while it's a little harder on the bees than a bee brush, it can also be done with the entire box rather than frame by frame. Once you've harvested the honey, you'll want to process it pretty immediately unless you have a plan to store it or freeze it to avoid pests. In warm climates where small hive beetles are abundant, they can infest an unattended honey super within about 48 hours. This is why you'll want to come up with a plan for extraction before you even harvest your honey. If you don't want to invest or borrow extracting equipment, or you just use foundationless comb or a top bar hive, you may choose to store the honey as comb honey, or you can crush and strain it. You can also crush and strain foundationless frames, as well as plastic foundation frames. Of course, you would just leave the foundation behind. Benefits here are that you can utilize the wax for other projects, but leaving the drawn comb intact can save your bees time and energy in the next honey flow, so this is a decision you'll need to make. Crush and strain depends on gravity and will take time. An extractor is a good method for speed and volume. And then, of course, you've got the flow hive, so make your decision accordingly. There are many uncapping tools available on the market for any budget. Cells can be uncapped with a simple fork, or if using the crush and strain method, uncapping can be skipped altogether. Find the uncapping tool that works best for you and your operation. Similarly, there are many extracting setups available, from hand cranks to motorized extractors. It can be as simple as using coarse filters and colanders to separate wax and honey, or as complex as several hundred frames harvested at a time. The spinners work by using centrifugal force, forcing the honey out of the cells and onto the sidewalls of the extractor for easy bottling. So you'll pick the extractor that works best for your operation size and budget. There's a few notes about storing honey. You may choose to store in 5-gallon buckets, 55-gallon barrels, or in individual jars. Regardless, you want to make sure that your containers are airtight so that the honey moisture content stays consistent. Over time, honey will crystallize, and it'll also change colors in many cases. Depending on the floral source, these processes can happen more or less quickly. Keep that in mind as well when you plan your harvest and storage. As always, we hope you learned a lot about bees and the honey extraction process today. Until next time, please be sure to follow and connect with us on social media to learn more tips and tricks along with the seasons.